This is the story of a nightmare, a demon that strikes healthy teenagers and young adults, that robs them of past, present, future, even life itself.
You know, schizophrenia is about the most complicated and fascinating disease that people have because it's so complex. It has so many different kinds of symptoms.
I heard little voices like angels.
I thought I could fly.
Feels like my head's exploding. Feels like my head's going into spontaneous combustion, man.
Schizophrenia is not split personality. Schizophrenia is not a creative adaptation that an individual makes to an insane world.
I'd walk down the street crying. I was crying all the time for no reason, and people would say, "Why is that girl crying?" And I'd explode. I'd say, "Don't you understand?"
This is a no-fault disorder. This is not something that's due to a willful child or somebody who just wants to be different.
Every voice was God. And so everything they told me to do was a command from God, and I was a good Christian, so I had to do what they said.
Schizophrenia is a brain disease that expresses itself in terms of disturbances of thinking and perception and behavior.
Paranoia, hallucinations, emotional withdrawal. For victims of schizophrenia, everyday life is a strange and terrifying journey. Schizophrenia shatters people's ability to feel or communicate, to understand or interact with the everyday world. The symptoms represent what we know best about the disease. What we don't know is exactly why it strikes, who will be the next victim, or how to stop it. This film is a journey into the lives of people who suffer from schizophrenia and the scientists who are trying to understand it.
Nobody knows. It's a mystery why this happens. It seems to be part of the human condition in that it is a uniquely human disorder, as far as we know, and about 1% of the population worldwide has the disease.
1% of the world population. 1 out of every 100 children, regardless of race, sex, economic class, or culture, will fall victim to the disease of the fragmented mind. Among its victims, we find prodigies and prophets, great artists, and mass murderers. But mostly, we find ordinary people like ourselves, our brothers and sisters, sons and daughters.
This is part of the human condition in that it's something that some people are going to have.
Schizophrenia strikes young men and women, most often between the ages of 15 and 30, and sends them into a state of endless mental agony.
I think of it as an extremely tragic disease because it pulls the rug out from people, psychologically speaking, right when they're entering the time of their life. In schizophrenia, it's totally silent for up to 2 decades during infancy, childhood, and early adolescence. You have people who are valedictorians and the best athletes in school, the most popular individuals, and boom, they develop schizophrenia and everything changes.
Do you think you've had a difficult life?
Oh, yeah, I've had a lot of suffering. I've had a lot of suffering, yeah.
Do you think your life has been harder than like other people?
Much harder than most people I know. How can you ask that question when I've had 71 psychiatric institutionalizations?
Steve was the eldest son of a family from Scarsdale, New York. As a child, his brain was a gift of the gods. It carried him through the best schools in the country. As an adult, it turned against him, drove him into mental institutions not 71, but 76 times. Steve blamed his problems on his mother, who was overprotective. His mother blamed it on his father, who was oversensitive. His father blamed it on Steve's friends, who gave him LSD. The doctors said that Steve had schizophrenia. Steve's mother told the doctors they had schizophrenia. No one in Steve's family knew what schizophrenia was.
Steve, can you describe the transition when you started, feeling psychotic?
Oh, yeah, it's like going to sleep in a penthouse in Manhattan and somehow waking up in on the suburbs of Nairobi in the jungle. It's as dramatic as that, yeah.
In 1969, Steve had graduated from MIT and just finished his first year of medical school. At age 21, he suffered the first of many psychotic attacks. A world full of promise was flooded with fear and paranoia.
Well, how do you describe paranoia? I mean, paranoia becomes just so incredibly intense that the feeling that everybody in the room knows what you're thinking, the feeling that everybody in the room wants to control you and get you to act in a certain way, either socially, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or sexually. They're all trying to force you to do certain things and act and think in a certain way.
For Steve, life became a painful roller coaster ride between madness and clarity, and his own brain became his worst enemy.
Intense suffering for me is going beyond my limits. Having too many neurons fire at once, having too many planes, being on too many planes at the same time. If you're asking how it affects my body, goddamn, I don't know.
Now, what is it?
Feels like my head's exploding.
Inside this box is the most sophisticated computer known to man. It can analyze complex situations and process multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. Inside this box is a human brain. At the Harvard Brain Tissue Resource Center in Massachusetts, Dr. Stephen Vincent and his staff search for clues to the causes of insanity by studying the difference between healthy and diseased brains.
Every time we have a brain here that we're processing, my staff and myself are constantly in awe of the miracle of what it is and the power of what it is and the ultimate mystery of what the human mind is and how the human brain functions.
A convoluted mass of fatty tissue, blood vessels, and fluid weighing under 2 pounds on average, the human brain has been the subject of clinical research for generations. This brain was alive only 4 hours earlier. Scientists have found visible differences in the size and shape of certain regions of the brains of some people with schizophrenia, but the findings are not consistent. And when viewed under the microscope, it is virtually impossible to distinguish the brain tissue of a person with schizophrenia from that of a normal individual. So what is it that makes a schizophrenic brain different from a normal brain?
Science is now showing us that the differences are at the level of brain wiring and brain chemistry.
Most brain activity involves communication between cells called neurons. Messages are sent by chemicals called neurotransmitters, such as dopamine and serotonin. In people with schizophrenia, these chemicals are often found in abnormal levels. But this imbalance in brain chemistry is only one reason for the communications breakdowns of schizophrenia. Increasingly, neurologists attribute some of these problems to irregularities in the structural organization of brain cells, patterns first established during fetal brain development. During the second trimester of pregnancy, neurons actually migrate to build specific pathways in the brain. Any errors at this stage have lasting repercussions.
The brains of these individuals with schizophrenia are wired somewhat differently. That is, the neurons are interconnected perhaps in different patterns than those of brains of individuals who are normal.
Only recently has modern technology given researchers the necessary tools to begin to understand the physical functions of the brain. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, is used to create detailed images of the living brain, at work processing information. Dr. Nancy Andreasen from the University of Iowa was a pioneer in this field.
The most compelling evidence for what is wrong with the brain in schizophrenia comes from functional imaging studies, where we can visualize the circuits in the brain. Circuits are areas that are interconnected with one another and that have to communicate with one another. You can think about it as, you know, programs on a computer making calls here and there for pieces of information or whatever. And in schizophrenia, those circuits aren't working right, and they're calling up connections, and they're misconnecting. And because they're misconnecting, sometimes people get the wrong information and hear voices when they shouldn't, or they misinterpret things that they see.
Scientists believe the problems are in part genetic. Human brain wiring begins at conception. Sensitive ultrasound imaging now allows researchers to monitor development of the fetal brain inside the womb.
In those early stages where neurons are being generated and they're migrating to their final positions and sending out branches to connect to other brain cells, it is thought that there may be some differences in the way that's happening with individuals who eventually are diagnosed with schizophrenia in their young adult time.
By tracking subjects from the womb right on through onset of the disease, researchers hope to pinpoint when and how the structural damage of schizophrenia strikes the brain.
We know how parts of it work. We know a lot about neurochemistry and receptors and development of the brain, but piecing that all together as a functioning whole unit of a human being with emotions and memory and personality, that we don't understand.
Stephen and Sean are identical twins. They grew up in a small village outside of Newcastle, England. As children, no one could tell them apart, not even their parents. Same genes, same family, same environment. But today there is one big difference. At the age of 30, one is healthy. One has schizophrenia.
How has he changed?
He's a lot quieter now, you know, and more in himself, you know. And he's like more lethargic, he doesn't get motivated much.
Once open and uninhibited, today, Sean hardly ever ventures outside of his home. As boys, the twins were indistinguishable and inseparable. Whatever they did together. They started a rock band. They played soccer, partied, drank, and experimented with drugs. Sean's talents led him to one of England's top art schools. At 20, he was designing award-winning logos for a prestigious graphic design company in London. Then, his mind and his life collapsed.
He was like almost getting distinctions and that, which is like the highest grade you can get. And we used to do like freelance work, sometimes for proper companies.
Could you do that today, do you think?
Oh, no, it's too much pressure on that type of work. I mean, you've got to meet deadlines and everything.
Today, at the age of 30, the twins are still inseparable. The disease that has shattered Sean's childhood dreams has leveled his brother Stephen as well. Both men are unemployed. Stephen is devoted to helping his brother cope in a chaotic world. The two are inseparable, but no longer indistinguishable.
If the problem wasn't there, everything would be a lot better, you know? I mean, I think it must be a lot worse for Sean, you know, because he's got the problem, you know?
Two things keep Sean in touch with the world: his brother and antipsychotic drugs.
If I didn't take the medication, I'd be locked up now.
Can you tell me, like, what you would do, what you think?
I'd probably just start fighting or try and kill someone.
Did you ever worry that you were going to get the same disease?
I still do, you know? I mean,